Hi, Misha here, and returning to Star Wars, I thought we would look at the Jedi Starfighter, which actually encompasses 2, even 3 fighter models. So sometimes we'll call one the fighter and one the interceptor, although other times we don't, and it gets very confusing. Anywho, let's talk about them. On the left here, we have the first we saw in Attack of the Clones, the Delta-7. Next to it, we have the Delta-7B, mostly from the Clone Wars. And over here, we have the Eta-2 from Revenge of the Sith and the Clone Wars. Actually, I have 2 models of it. The shiny one is actually from Hot Wheels as part of their commemorative series. And it has a thing that I like. And then the one over here, the one in Pimpin' Purple, is, of course, Mace Windu's from the Titanium collection, and it has something I like. So, each has goods and bads, pros and cons, and these two, while similar, are a different shape and mold. The Delta-7 is Kit Fisto's. Lucas had to have known how that sounded when he named him, and the fact that he went ahead naming him that is awesome. And then over here we have Anakin Skywalker's. And with that, let's just talk about the history here. Do you think when Kit Fisto defeated an enemy, he said, "You've just been fisted"? What would his catchphrase be? Let me know in the comments below. So this is the original Delta-7, which predates the Clone Wars. By how much? We really don't know. Some sources say it was coming into use around 27 BBY. Others say it was already in use by 32 BBY. Doesn't really matter, pre-Clone Wars. Kuat, later famous for designing and building the Star Destroyers, would work with the Jedi Council and even some individual Jedis to create something fast and light for them. It would have the systems they needed and would not have the ones they did not. That's where we get the Delta-7. This is a very small craft, but first let's talk about the engines. In the back we have 2 sublight engines here. In an atmosphere, they could get it up to 1,260 miles per hour, kilometers per hour. So pretty fast by the standards of the Star Wars universe, although not by our standards. But it did not have an internal hyperdrive. For that, it had to operate this here ring. It was a docking ring that would fly onto and detach to go away. You would hide it somewhere and then redock, either to go into hyperspace or just to resupply. It contained fuel for the craft. It also contained oxygen and water. For example, just as an interceptor here, this only had about 5 hours of air standard and really nothing else. But when it would dock with this, it could recharge and go on to up to about a week. Which makes sense. There's plenty of room in here for the hyperdrive and more. How fast? Class 2, although some sources say Class 1, so take your pick. But of course, having a ring to leave behind would leave it vulnerable. The interceptor itself here is 8 meters long. Well, this isn't, it's a couple of inches, but you know what I mean. It's under 4 meters wide and less than 1.5 meters tall. It has a lightweight alloy hull. Pretty standard if cramped cockpit. It does have an Astromech to work with the hyper ring, also for repairs, navigation, and other computing services. But because of how slim the craft is, this was an R3 or later R4 variant, cut in half essentially, half-sized, and it was actually wired into the hull of the ship. It wasn't readily removable in the field. Had relatively light armor because of the lightweight and thin hull, but it did have a shield generator. It wasn't especially powerful, but it could take a hit or two. And it did have weapons. It had 2 dual rapid-fire lasers as standard, although some variants, some modifications would have more or different. And that's just it. Each Jedi Starfighter was customized by its owner or operator, because these were issued as a standard thing to any agent operating in the field or going in the field. And they were designed for long range. So while they lacked a lot of sensors that a Jedi's senses can make up for, they did have long-range communication systems, very powerful ones, and other things that would be of benefit. They were typically painted in red as a standard, although many users would customize them, and during the Clone Wars they would get interesting paint jobs, to say the least. But yeah, a fast, very nimble little craft. Pretty lightly armed. It could take a hit or two. And it was relatively expensive, about 180,000 credits, not counting the hyperdrive ring. And it did have some limitations because it was so focused on weight, speed, that it did not have much room for anything else, including cargo of any type, really. It barely could fit the user. As far as the titanium here, the ring is quite big. I think it's all plastic. It might have some metal here, because it does some weight to it. It's a very good size, large as the palm of your hand. The ship is metal, except for the canopy, which does open, but this one's tight, so I don't want to open it, because sometimes when you open them, they get wiggly. That's about it. No extendable landing gear on this one. Some of the titaniums have that. Yeah, just a arrowhead little simple shape. And yeah, we first saw this in Attack of the Clones, the Obi-Wan Flow, and it would be used throughout the war. In fact, some were still around at the end during the Battle of Coruscant. But that was not the most capable. Enter the Delta-7B, a modified version. Now this is Anakin's. It's even further modified, but it's a good example of how, by the Clone Wars, these were getting doctored up good. The biggest and most noticeable change, easiest to tell a 7 from a 7B. On a 7, the Astromech, remember back over, is off to the side there, half size. On the B, it's center line where the hull's at its thickest, so that a standard Astromech can be used and detached. So he could still perform the same functions, but he could be removed from the ship to operate, well, wherever it needed to be. Even in the center line, it required a slightly thickened hull. And so they did this. They also armored the hull so it could take a few more hits. And a few other improvements to make it a little more durable. But that was about it, really. So the main difference was the Astromech. Some like this have updated lasers, and they have extended wings and fin back here, and this one has an added hyperdrive block down here. So the B could be modified with a bolt-on hyperdrive, although it would be a lower class than the ring. I don't know exactly, at least a 4, maybe a 6. So it would be slower, but it wouldn't have to have the vulnerability of the ring. So that's generally a good thing. And we saw both the Delta-7 and the Delta-7B throughout the Clone Wars. And we saw other interesting modifications of this one. And it doesn't really seem to have given up much in the way of speed. If so, just a small amount. But it gained more durability and a faster way to get around. And it didn't have to worry about its ring being destroyed and it being abandoned. But it was still a Jedi fighter with pretty minimal systems, pretty lightly armored, and still had pretty light shields. And that would lead to our next series. So, for the next generation of Jedi Starfighters, they could have gone one of two ways. They could have continued kind of like with the Delta-7B, getting it heavier, going more for defense, or they could just make it lighter and nimbler, using speed and maneuverability for defense. And that's exactly what they did at Kuat for the Eta-2 Actis-class, still part of the Delta series, sometimes called the Jedi Interceptor. By the way, sometimes the Delta-7 was called the Aethersprite. So what do we have here? This was introduced around 20 BBY. In fact, Anakin flew the first prototype. It was in relatively widespread use by 19 BBY in the Battle of Coruscant, although many Jedi continued to use this Delta-7 or 7B. It's actually shorter, at under 5.5 meters long, although it is slightly wider than the Delta-7 at about 4.3 meters. It's overall a lighter space frame thanks to this scalloping. Oh, wrong side, wrong end. Blah, blah, blah. Right here. Not only did this save weight, it gave a better forward view, but of course it left the occupant more exposed. Also more exposed, it did not have a shield generator. It was felt that the Delta-7s only did limited protection and took up space and energy, so just get rid of it. It had twin engines like the 7, but these are ion engines, made famous by the TIE later on. Primarily, it had 2 laser cannons up front. These were heavier than on the Delta-7, but it could have a secondary set of twin ion cannons. Now, this model here, this toy here, this ship here from the Titanium series does not have the ion cannons on the side. Some really didn't have it. But this mold here from the Hot Wheels does have them. See that? So this has the 4 guns. For what it's worth, this one's in silver, but this was supposed to be Obi-Wan's from the opening. So pros and cons to each. Both are die-cast. And thanks to the lighter weight, smaller size, and newer engines, this had a higher top speed and atmosphere of 1500 kph. But to deal with the new weapons and whatnot, it had these fins here that could fold out to radiate heat, or fold in for landing or when not needed. You see they move on this one, all 4 of them. That's kind of neat. These did have sensors and whatnot, but many Jedi would just remove them. They did have a little more carrying capability. They could carry about 3 days worth of consumables, or I shouldn't say and about 60 kg of cargo. So a little better there than the Delta-7, but they still needed a hyperdrive ring to travel. Not exactly this model. It was a new model, is faster as a Class 1. And there are some of the ETA-2s in the titanium that do come with the ring, but they're pretty hard to find, especially when you can't see pictures, so I don't have one. I'll get one day maybe, but they're kind of neat. These do have an Astromech droid. It is a full size. It's on the side now. It's a little bit thicker of a ship. Better view for the cockpit there. The Delta-7 was kind of designed originally to be more of a policing craft, a police cruiser, a diplomatic thing. This was designed to be a true fighter-interceptor, and it shows. It, uses speed and whatnot. But these would not just be used by the Jedi. There was a slightly different version known as the clone Eta-2. And in fact, the Venator Star Destroyer would often carry 192 clone versions alongside other aircraft or spacecraft like the V-19 and later V-Wing. In fact, it must be said that the V-Wing is also part of the Delta series from Kuat. So they're all kind of a piece. Other features of this one, it has an opening cockpit. And it has landing gear that can come down front. Nothing really in the back, I don't think. I don't think so. There might be a small one there, but I don't think it has one there on the back. But it has the front little landing gear. Well, I think it might. Yeah, it does. There's just help with the stand. Sorry about that. So yeah, it has all 3 gear. They can fold down. It's neat to have them, but also it kind of breaks the line up and is not completely correct. So yeah, it's kind of how you want to go about it. Comes with the standard stand. I can never plug it back in now because it's being ornery. They do fit well though when they go in. It's pretty heavy, and as you saw, those move. The Hot Wheels doesn't have any of that. It has its own typical stand. It also fits well. There's just the screws on the bottom, no gear that folds down, no cockpit that opens, and these radiator panels do not open up. But it does have the secondary cannon, and because it's a little more of a piece, it is heavier. They're both metal, but this one's more metal because of not having all the little moving bits. Like I said, in a different stand. So, what about the history after the Clone Wars and some real world stuff? Obviously, we didn't have a Jedi Starfighter in the original trilogy, so these are all prequels era. But you can see how this led to the V-Wing, which led to the TIE Fighter, also the A-Wing. That light, nimble thing. In Attack of the Clones, this design was first kind of conceived of as a clone Starfighter before it was kind of repurposed for the Jedi. This one over here, Anakin's, is for the Clone Wars and kind of that media. It's actually, I think, maybe the lightest of all these as far as the little model, because of all the detailing going on. The central hull is metal, but the fins and add-ons are plastic. So the cannon, it's pretty lightweight, relatively long though. It's neat for what it is. Not something you see every day. The ring over here is neat, how it clips on and holds on really well. It just slides in with friction, but it holds on well. And you can still have it on the stand. As far as the Eta-2, there's actually a lot going on this little thing, from the folding panels. You can fold them individually. are all together. Like I said, you can do gear up, gear down. Can it be open? And there even is a version with a hyperdrive ring. And you can get all kinds of different color schemes. So, whatever you like. The Delta-7 served through the Clone Wars, but never served with the Empire. In fact, Kuat would sell the entire Delta line to Kuat Systems by 14 BBY. So they got out of the fighter game, kind of focusing on capital ships. The Rebellion would acquire some of these and use them early on, but really they weren't well suited, especially with the whole hyperdrive ring thing, to non-Jedi. So their use was pretty limited, and by the time of Yavin, this was a relic, kind of a rarity, a curiosity, even a valuable collectible. But the Eta-2, it continued on. It was very much still in production after the Clone Wars. It would continue on until the TIE series completely eclipsed it years later. But these would still be in the Empire, and they would be given to the elite pilots because they had the greater speed and greater firepower than a TIE fighter, and at least compared to a TIE fighter, greater endurance, greater durability. But they would hang out in the Empire because they had thousands of them for several years. But by the time of Yavin, they too were pretty much phased out of service in favor of either new TIEs like the Advanced or the Interceptor itself, the TIE Interceptor. And there aren't many accounts of these turning up in Rebellion hands, which makes sense because they were only in limited production, or, early production by the time of the end of the Clone Wars, so most were produced directly under the Empire. In fact, before the TIE Advance, this is what Darth Vader flew, using his droid, R4K5? Or K5R4? I don't know, whatever. Lexicus. Yeah, just thought I'd talk about these and kind of how they fit into the grand scheme of Star Wars starships. Which one do you like, or not at all? Let me know in the comments. As always, if you could, like, share, and subscribe. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon next time.